Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/KYHistoryPod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and I'm with David Kirkpatrick. How you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
Doing good. We got some good Kentucky history to talk about. So probably, well, if you're used to listening to this channel, you should be used to listening or finding out about some people you may not know about. I assume that might be the draw in coming to listen to the channel in the first place. But we're going to talk about John Floyd, right?
Absolutely. Great frontiersman. Yes,
great frontiersman. Very much unknown. I talked a while back with Jeff Winstead, and he was talking about how John Floyd is always popping around everywhere, but not as much is known about him, and that's really the very true case. He pops around in all these different places, but he was right there in the thick of it with Boone and Harrod and Logan and all of them.
Oh yeah. He's one of those guys that's a lot like the moon landing. They talk about Neil Armstrong, and everyone knows his name, but no one knows the folks that were with him. They're just there in the background. And Floyd is that way at every significant event in early Kentucky history. He's got a finger in it somewhere.
Very true. Very true. And not only, we've talked about a bunch of these frontiersmen over the past few months, but Floyd kind of fits in a different league in a way. He's a surveyor first and foremost. But does he endure the frontiersman life? Very much so. So that's one bit of a takeaway, I guess. We talked about Isaac Shelby. He was more political, and you got Boone and Squire Boone and all these other people, and George Rogers Clark, more military based. John Floyd is going to fall into that area of more of a surveyor. And nothing against Boone or any of those other surveyors, but he's on the legit side of surveying, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. He started out in Virginia and got in very early on, and instead of just surveying for himself, he ends up surveying for the government, which we'll talk about.
And as everybody knows, a good government job get you places.
Good to have.
Yeah. Now, to clarify or to let people know, there's a biography out there called John Floyd: The Life and Letters of a Frontier Surveyor by Neil O'Hammond, who very knowledgeable of Kentucky frontier. He does this book pretty good. It's a bit set up differently because John Floyd wrote a lot of letters, just corresponding back and forth with government officials and other people. So the book is set up pretty good. It kind of gives a big lengthy biography about him, and then it shows you all his letters. So you can get it at a library pretty easily, a library loan or whatever, if you need to do that. But it's pretty good read, pretty quick and easy read too. Once you kind of get past the biography, it's just letters, and those letters kind of give you some pretty good insight just of how things were, I guess. But it's a pretty good book. I would recommend it, or you could just listen to us talk about it because we're going to go over it pretty well.
That's right.
So yeah, let's get started. John Floyd was born in 1750 to William and Abadiah. Am I saying that right? Abadiah Floyd?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe the female version of Obadiah.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. I want to kind of say Obadiah with that, but it's Abadiah. That would be the best way to go with it. But born near James River in Amherst County, Virginia. He lived on the frontier at the time. That was kind of the frontier area in the 1750s, is the western part of Virginia. Um, Not really much is known about his childhood, which is typical. We can kind of speculate, but in those times, not everybody was keeping those massive baby books of everybody's first step and first word and first tooth and first locks of hair and all that stuff.
Yeah, there are
But
things on the mind.
yeah, yeah. Are you eating? Can you got food? Uh, that was pretty much the priority. Um, Nothing against those school books. We got our own here at the cable household. Um, but there was 9 children. He was one of 9 children, so a different scenario. He kind of received what you would call a standard education of the time and his location. He wasn't going to school every day. Kind of get your learning as you went. Um, so pretty typical. Wish we knew more, but we can only go with what we had. In 1768, he married Burnell Burford. Um, However, she died during birth of their first daughter. John named her Morning, which to me sounds very depressing, to name your kid Morning after your wife has died from that. And maybe he was thinking of a new morning, looking at it in
Right.
that way. But I would kind of get it as mourning as in sorrow and all
Yes.
that stuff. So uh, pretty uh, rough to say the least.
Yeah.
He ends
Pretty
up
young at
giving,
the time.
yeah, pretty young. I mean, he would only been 18. Um, so he gave her to his wife's grandmother to raise. So, uh, you know, obviously, pretty heart struck, pretty heartbreaking to have this all happening, and the fact that he even gives his daughter to the grandmother, is just a little telling. Definitely a rough time. But there's rumors, of course, that as well that he ended up having an affair with his wife's sister, Caroline,
Mhm.
who gave birth to a son who she named John, and that he later changed his name to Floyd. So it's ended up being John Floyd. Um, However, whenever I read this, I kind of was like, well, how did he have an affair necessarily if his wife had already died? So I don't know if there's, it
Yeah. I don't know if the
it
sister
didn't really
was
line
married.
up to the. Yeah, yeah, I didn't. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe the sister was married. That would not be the only other um, understanding, or that would call it an affair, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. But that kind of was his first, kind of one of his major kind of setbacks, or you know bad times in his life. Which he's 18. We all screw up, or bad things happen when we're 18. So
Right.
we can understand and relate. But he becomes a surveyor, and this is kind of where things really take off for John. He becomes a surveyor, and he studied under Colonel William Preston. And this is a very important thing because Colonel William Preston pretty much is John's, let's say, right hand man or his mentor for the majority of his life. And I would think that a lot of John's success is because of this connection to William Preston. Um, John surveyed for about 2 years and became the assistant surveyor of, well, I know I'm going to mess this one up, Botorat County.
Botetourt. Yep.
Botetourt.
Botetourt. Yeah.
Botetourt County by the College of William and Mary. Botetourt, man, that's an interesting name. Do you
Yeah.
know where that came from?
There was a Lord Botetourt. And so you like some
Ah,
of those counties,
okay.
they,
uh, Lord Botetourt. Because Kentucky has some interesting county names, but Botetourt is pretty good. Is a pretty interesting one. Um, so yeah, Botetourt and all that kind of stuff. Uh, then Castle County that was formed, and William Preston was the head surveyor and sheriff with John as his deputy surveyor. And now a deputy surveyor had to be with someone while surveying to get a survey approved. It could be the head surveyor or the deputy surveyor. So John surveyed the area of the Holston. And if you've been listening to the channel, you know who came from the Holston.
That's right.
Do you
Old
know?
Daniel.
Huh?
You know Daniel Boone and those guys around the Holston.
And Stanford, who's our Stanford guy?
Yeah, oh yeah, Mr. Logan. That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
I should have started with him.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not worried about old Boone, but yeah. So just another, kind of one of those interesting connections we keep on finding, especially around the Holston. But yeah, so he surveyed that area and many more. But anyway, that's kind of his first getting himself started surveying.
Yeah, and we talk about connections. A few episodes ago, we talked about Thomas Bullitt came down, and Herod and came with him to survey the falls of the Ohio. And all those surveys get rejected initially, and they're rejected by Preston, who later will come to Kentucky. And so, they're all interconnected, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, a party was organized to survey lands in Kentucky, and John was made the leader of that party, and which is kind of what we're talking about. And then, of course, included James Knox, who was another famous frontiersman. On the trip, Floyd carries the warrants for people like Hugh Mercer, the man Mercer County is named after, George Washington, Patrick Henry. I mean, there's confidence in his abilities if he's doing something this substantial. So, and for a 1,000-acre survey, the charge was a whopping £2 and 8 shillings and 8 cents. So, not a significant amount, but enough to preclude the lowest ranks in society, but just the right price for some of these wealthy landed gentlemen to kind of add to their collections, because some of those guys are just collecting Western lands. But in 74, on their way to Kentucky, the Shawnee and the Virginians, have a little run-in, and what will become Dunmore's War eventually. And Floyd is kind of stuck because people can see the clouds of war gathering. So he tries to hire a guide, and the man just simply tells him, "You better watch your scalp. I mean, this is a dangerous time to be heading westward." Which I have to admit, even on my most adventurous days, would probably make me turn around. But it didn't seem to bother me. He gets them out the Kentucky River, and some of those men went on to Fort Herod, which is a place of safety. And Floyd and the rest of the party moved towards the falls of the Ohio. And most of what he does in Kentucky is going to be centered around that, what is now southern Jefferson County and places like that. But in 10 days, they had surveyed 40,000 acres, which is unfathomable to me because you're surveying with the chains and rods. So basically, if you think about Friday Night Football and they drag out to measure the 10-yard marker, you are doing that over hills and creeks and things. And that's just, beyond understanding to me. But that they'd succeed, and fear of the Shawnee attack is still kind of mounting. So Floyd and his crew move east and begin surveying around what would become Midway, Kentucky. And in 12 days, they had surveyed 50,000 acres around central Kentucky. So these guys know what they're doing, and they are putting their shoulder to the grindstone.
Yeah. I mean, that's yeah. That is quite amazing. I mean, you think about just like it would take a while to survey, any land at any time, I would say. But think about, Kentucky in this time, this is not just land, it's wilderness, full of brush and everything else, canes and all that kind of stuff. It's not something that they can just say, "Oh, over there, let's look over there." They're having to go through all this and go back and forth now. Not to toot my own horn, but I was a state land judging champion back in my high school days. So I can survey a little bit. Yeah.
You know what it was like then.
Yeah. No, definitely different. But yeah, Floyd and his team, they had planned on meeting at Harrodsburg after the surveying. However, the men at Harrodsburg had left fearing the native attacks, and when Floyd arrived at Harrodsburg, there was a note that was carved in a tree Alarmed by finding some people killed, we are gone down this way. And after about 17-day trek back up the river and over the mountains, Floyd and his crew made it back home. Now, we didn't really mention this, but you think about 1774, 1775, this area, this is all when Herod first came over. They built their cabins. They didn't build the fort yet, but
Right.
all those things were in the makings. But then all those people left, like because of the Native American attacks there for a while. And so, I mean, I find it baffling to think here we are. We're on this big expedition. We're going to meet at this place. We have all these plans, and then you get to this place and like nobody's there. And you
Yeah.
find a note on a tree.
But that's confusing to me because Herod and those guys evacuate because, like you said, the Native Americans with Dunmore's War, they're ordered back. Boone comes carrying orders. So why carve the note in the tree? And so I've wondered, was that left by someone who came after them, and then Floyd's men find it? Was there another
Yeah.
wave of surveyors that came through? Who carved it in the tree? So I know it's a small
Yeah.
detail, but it sticks with me.
Yeah, that's interesting because I mean, you think where how was this unfolded? And to think, I mean, I can't try to think of it. What would that be like today? But like with cell phones and stuff, it's so easy to get a hold of somebody, say, hey, I can't do this. But I guess the comparison today would be leave your cell phone at home and go to work.
Right.
Then you're just lost. What's going to happen? Who knows? Yeah, I don't know. Um, But yeah, so while Floyd was on his way home, Daniel Boone and Michael Stoner had been sent to find the surveyors and actually lead them home. So that's another connection there. As soon as Floyd returned, though, that's when Lord Dunmore's War breaks out, and Floyd actually misses the Battle of Point Pleasant. And after the war, planned his second trip to Kentucky. And we've talked about this before, how kind of Lord Dunmore's War was kind of this gossip central for all of these frontiersmen who end up going and talking about Kentucky and then make their plans to head west. Um, but that's the way it goes.
Right.
Floyd got word of the Transylvania Company's dealings, and about the same time Floyd was crossing over the Cumberland Gap, he was joined by John Todd, and his guide was James Knox. Keep on bringing up James Knox because James Knox is an important one we probably need to cover at some point. But guess who else was with him? Benjamin Logan.
Benjamin Logan.
On their way, they crossed the Rockcastle River. They head west on Skaggs Trace. They went through what is now Crab Orchard, and on March 1st, 1775, 25 miles south of Harrodsburg, they made camp and planted corn. And this area would be called St. Asaph in honor of the canonized Welsh monk. I don't really know what canonized means, but
I think he's officially a saint according to Catholic Church. I think so.
gotcha.
Yeah, pretty prestigious fella, and it's interesting because you don't see a lot of Welsh names in Kentucky, but
Yeah.
so that's kind of different.
Yeah.
But
but the other thing to bring up is that it's very known. I got the Lincoln County history book, and it talks about John Floyd coming with Benjamin Logan and deciding the St. Asaph and all that stuff because of Floyd. But as we were reading and talked about in the Benjamin Logan biography, it's kind of a bit more murky on who was leading the people of that party. Was it Logan? Was it Floyd? And then there's a disagreement with Henderson, not liking Logan and so forth. But we're gonna go with Benjamin Logan being the leader of that party.
that sounds good.
and John Floyd was there to survey.
That's right. That's right. It actually makes sense, but based on their personalities, that sounds right. And like you said, there's some disagreement. And the historians now think that Logan and Knox came with Floyd and not Henderson. For a while, Henderson kind of got the credit for bringing all these people to Kentucky. Part of that ties into the legend of Daniel Boone, and people heard the name. But Logan has a military claim here already, so he has a reason for coming. And so Floyd ends up surveying the land for Logan, and it was the first he did in Kentucky that year, so that was kind of monumental. And then he leaves for Boonesboro. So we can see these frontiersmen, they venture out, they survey or they hunt, but they always return to one of these forts like Boonesboro, Fort Herod, Fort Logan, just for safety. But settlers are pouring in, and Henderson really couldn't do anything about it. And perhaps in this book, more than others, or in this narrative, you really sense the frustration of how much it was the Wild West, because you have people like Henderson who are hiring Floyd to survey, and then you show up the next day and someone has a cabin there. So it's a frustration. John Floyd attends the Transylvania Company as a delegate, and Henderson didn't really like Floyd being in Kentucky. You think they'd be on the same side, but remember, Floyd represents the government of Virginia. Floyd represents Preston, the office of Pencastle County, and Henderson knows that's a threat to his plan to form Transylvania Company. But Floyd's pretty astute, and he assures Henderson, there's no cause for alarm or trouble. He's going to survey in the northern part of the state, and he's kind of playing both sides and biding his time. And I think everyone kind of realized that at some point things would come to a head, and either Transylvania would win out, or the other side, which would end up being led by the folks in Harrodsburg, would win out. But at this point, we're at a fifth of a shilling per acre, or £1 for 100 acres. So you can see the conflict has driven down the price a little bit. People aren't coming as readily. But it again, boggling my mind, more than 500,000, something on the order of 500,060 acres was surveyed and presented to Henderson for purchase. And most of it's done on credit. So, again, Floyd is sort of playing both sides at this point, but he's making do, and he's very good at his job.
Yeah, and it goes back to the point that the whole Henderson situation is Henderson is trying to get rich himself with the Transylvania Company, and knowing that Floyd is there for Virginia, really probably I can very much see how it's a conflict of interest. But that kind of works itself out over time. But during all this time, of course, what fires up the Revolutionary War in 1776, and that, of course, changes a lot of stuff. But we've talked about all these frontiersmen, and I when I was reading this book, I was like, man, these statistics came up, and the age of these frontiersmen at the time, and it baffles me to think they were all this young. And I mean, maybe they are in some sense a little bit older. But at this time, so 1776, the war breaks out. You have George Rogers Clark, who's 23, which is, man, I mean, I just think, man, that's so young. I mean,
especially for a military officer.
Yeah. You have John Todd and Isaac Shelby, who are both 25. John Floyd's 26. William Whitley's 27. And I guess I always think of William Whitley as being this old guy.
Right.
So it's hard to think otherwise. Squire Boone and James Harrod are both 31. Benjamin Logan's 33. And then Boone is actually the old guy. He's 41. So it's just a bit baffling and a bit perspective given, I guess, when you think about how old they were and what they all end up doing in the course of their life, and pretty much establishing the state of Kentucky and bringing all these people over here. It's pretty interesting stat. Now, I think out of all those people, we've talked about most of these people on the podcast. But with that aside, Floyd and his men do begin surveying land of the north of the Kentucky River, so around Lexington, and then the land conflicts began. Floyd surveyed some land for Jacob Boothman, but it had already been surveyed by Daniel Boone for James Hickman. So Floyd said he would give the land to Boothman and surveyed another lot for Hickman. Of course, more issues follow as settlers arrive, and they just build their cabins here and there on land that had already been surveyed for others. You can see how this would be a conflict. And we talked about, I mean, this has been a while back in the Logan episodes about some of the land claims. All you had to do was put up a few logs and make a shelter, and this is mine now.
Right.
But then you have the official surveyor coming in saying, hold on, I want to survey this for somebody. um, just a little bit of a problem.
It is. And when you think about, they're marking their surveys by cutting, etches into trees or large stones. I mean, even if you're completely honest and unless you have a good eye, you're going to miss those. So there's a lot of overlapping land claims and things like that. And Floyd, I think kind of senses that Kentucky's filling up. So he begins to work on his home at Woodstock, which is what he called it, located near Boones Creek. So we're looking at a few miles northwest of Boonesboro. But Floyd becomes the land clerk at Boonesboro. He's assured by Henderson that the surveys at Beargrass Creek and what becomes Jefferson County, those are going to be honored. It eliminates the only real conflict with Floyd at that point, so things are smooth. He successfully played both sides, and he would end up being in charge of surveying for the entire colony. So Floyd really has a good thing going for himself. I'm not sure how he explained that, when the Virginia legislator got alarmed by Transylvania, that he's supposed to be working for Fincastle County, and here he is, working for Transylvania at the same time. But he made it work, and of course winter sets in, and at that point you're not really out, planting corn or anything like that. You kind of gravitate back towards the forts, Logan's Station, Fort Harrod, and Boonesboro. And Floyd remains at Boonesboro while Henderson leaves to go back east. So he's left in charge of the land office, which again is what most people are there for. So outside of being in charge of the defense of the fort, I can't think of anything really more vital. So again, a lot of trust placed in him. And Floyd and Henderson made another agreement that Floyd would do his best to persuade Preston, again, who's in charge of the Fincastle land office, to honor what the Transylvania Company was doing. And Henderson would make sure, as a result, that all of Floyd's surveys were honored as correct. So, if you're Floyd, it makes sense to do that. It seems a little underhanded to some degree, but if the Transylvania Company had won out, we'd probably feel very different about the whole.
Well, that's what I was thinking. You're kind of saying, "Hey, man, I'll try to persuade him," but if it doesn't work, oh well, because who's going to be in charge? The state of Virginia, and whose surveys are going to be honored by the state of Virginia?
Right.
Floyd's.
Yep.
He's got his surveys are going to be honored. So a little bit. I mean, he. I guess he was definitely playing the sides, and I think he was setting himself up for success for sure.
And he's done well, because as wealthy as Henderson is and powerful as he is, Henderson needs Floyd infinitely more than Floyd needs Henderson at this point. Because, like you said, regardless of who wins, Floyd's in a good position. But the war proceeds, and in 1776, it's rolling pretty well. And Floyd returns to Virginia to get livestock and supplies for his return to Kentucky. He ends up coming back in May, and a lot of those expeditions, they started in the late spring when water is up and you can ride the rivers and things. But he has some disagreements with some settlers, primarily because the price of land has begun to go back up in Kentucky as people want to move westward. And they're not real happy with the area around the Falls, the Ohio, which is modern day Louisville, being sold to the surveyor and his friends as opposed to being sold to the public at large. Again, one of those things where it doesn't look real good for Floyd. But he has to deal with it, and so that's another mess they've got to get through.
Yeah, and not to say who's right or who's wrong here, but again, when I guess he's in the position to make those decisions, and he's definitely making sure that it kind of works out for him. And again, we get these points. Floyd kind of gets angered when he finds out that John McClellan has built a station on the land that he had surveyed for himself, and he actually goes to evict him. And if you can remember, McClellan Station, one of the early settlements, but he goes to evict the new tenants. But when he saw the hardship that his wife and children were having, he ends up selling it to John. So a little bit of redemption if he's,
Right.
and again, that that happens. I'm sure McClellan and them roll up on this land and say, "Hey, this is a good place. Let's set up here," having no clue that it has been surveyed by anybody. Um,
Right.
you can't go look at every tree in this wilderness area to make sure. Um, the land problems, though, I mean, they continue to grow and escalate, which they honestly continue until like the 1820s, I think. Um, but these problems keep going. The new arrivals to Harrodsburg and other places were seeking land, only to find that it already was taken or had been surveyed for others. A lot of these surveyors were held for wealthy landowners in the east, people trying to get their claim. The Transylvania Company was giving land out at first come first served basis, and these kind of things, conflicting to say the least, causing problems. Some people would even stack a few logs up, like we said, to make it look like a cabin was being built. Then other people would move in there. Overall, just a complete mess.
Right.
And then came kind of what Floyd had called the Harrodsburg Revolt, led by led by James Harrod. And we've talked about this before again, kind of the whole issue of the Transylvania Company and Harrod and all that. Uh, so then Floyd was more critical of a man named John Gabriel Jones, who had some high connections. Real quickly, it wasn't that big a deal to say the whole big scheme, but it looked like he was trying to go against Floyd's surveys, and he kind of wanted to be the surveyor in a sense and kind of knock out. But nothing much came about it. Everybody kind of stuck with Floyd throughout the time. But I mean, anything about the Harrodsburg Revolt you want to throw out there? I mean, kind of talked about it before. Go ahead.
John Gabriel Jones kind of comes off a little better in Harrodsburg because of that. He's one of the people appointed to go back to Virginia and kind of represent Harrodsburg's case that what was going on with Transylvania wasn't really great. And then, of course, he dies young, not long after that, within a year of that. So he doesn't have a lot of time to mess up. And sometimes being a hero just means the absence of messing up. So he did have really good connections. His dad was a lawyer back in Virginia, and he'd come as a young man. But it's one of those things where he just was. His time on the frontier was so brief. But yeah, the land issue eventually has to be put on the back burner, despite all that in 76, because Native American attacks are really ramping up as the revolution ramps up in the east. And an increasing number of settlers were becoming fearful. Many leave for home. There's a great evacuation of Kentucky. And when the attacks do finally come, as people are anticipating they will, Floyd also returns home disappointed. The surveys would not hold. The Transylvania Company surveys he had done would not hold after the protest of what transpired in Harrodsburg reached the ears of the legislator. And most likely the military grants were on hold as well for the time being, because there are a lot of people claiming land for service in the French and Indian War, and Harrod and the men that came with him, for one. And people were kind of anticipating that was going to be recognized as legal, but it was still somewhat murky. So
that's a pretty interesting point to stop at, because you kind of have this whole build up, all the surveying's going on, and then the war starts, and then things kind of look a little grim in Kentucky. So people kind of start headed back, and we're gonna stop right here. We'll come back next week to talk a little bit more about John Floyd's life and something very unexpected. And I just about guarantee, unless you know about John Floyd, you don't know what's about to happen or what he's about to do. So, anything else, real quick?
No, I think that's it. Like you said, a lot of people have interesting experiences during the 1770s, but his are pretty unique. So, looking forward to that.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.